Chapter 2, Section 3 is about multiplying and dividing rational numbers. Only two vocab words, multiplicative inverse and reciprocal. Multiplicative inverse is kind of like the additive inverse, but for multiplication. It's the reciprocal of a number. And a number in its multiplicative inverse always multiply to make 1. So remember, with an additive inverse, it would always sum to 0. This time, it's to 1. And remember, the reciprocal of a number is just the number flipped around. So a divided by b and b divided by a are reciprocals of each other. So only two objectives. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to multiply rational numbers and divide by rational numbers. So there's some properties of multiplication, just like we had properties of addition. For every real number n, 1 times n and n times 1 will always give you n. So this is the identity property. This says it doesn't matter what you multiply by 1 and what order you multiply in, you always end up with the same number. And then the multiplication property of 0 says it doesn't matter what you multiply by 0 or what order it's in, multiplying a number by 0 is always 0. And then negative 1. Negative 1 times any number in whatever order changes the sign. This always gives you the opposite. So they give you negative 1 times 5 is negative 5. But also, if you do negative 5 times negative 1, that's going to give you positive 5. It gives you the opposite of a number. And then multiplying rules. The product of two positive or two negative is always positive. So if you have the same sign, doesn't matter what the sign is, same sign gives you a positive answer. If you have different signs, you're always going to get a negative. Doesn't matter what order it's in. So if we simplify each expression, so the first thing I'm going to look at, 4 times negative 6, there's only one negative there, which means that my answer is going to be negative. And then 4 times 6 means that you have 6 4s all added together, or 4 6s all added together, however you want to look at it. So that is going to give us 24. Now the next one, we end up with same sign, so we know our answer is going to be positive. If we do 10 times 5, that's 10 being added 5 times, which is 50. Now this one we're going to have to do some work, but because both of these signs are negative, we know our answer is going to be positive. And then when we go to multiply these, you always put the number with more digits on top. And then we have to do 8 times 9. That's going to give me 72, so carry the 7. And then 8 times 4 is 32, plus 7 more is going to give us 39. And we just figure out how many decimals there are in our product. So there's only one. There's got to be 1 in our answer. And make sure this makes sense. This is almost 5, and 8 times 5 we know is 40, almost 40. So our answer is going to be positive 39.2. And the next one, we only have one negative here, so we know our answer is going to be negative. And then fractions are awesome with multiplication because all you have to do is multiply everything on the top together and then everything on the bottom together. So 2 times 3 is 6, and 3 times 4 is 12. And in this case, we can simplify it. So let's simplify this to negative 1/2. Now when you have exponents, you have to remember that exponents are just repeated multiplication. So be careful what you look at when you go to simplify. All this is saying right here is that the 4 is cubed. That negative is like a floating negative 1, and then we have 3 4s being multiplied together. So my answer should be negative because there's only one negative there. So 4 times 4 gives me 16, times 4 again gives me negative 64. Where b is a little different, because the negative is inside of the parentheses, this means that I'm doing negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So there's an even number of negatives here. Like these two negatives would cross off and make a positive. Those two would cross off and make a positive. And then we know two positives make a positive. So our answer here has to be positive. 2 times 2 gives me 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Same type of thing with this. We have negative 0.3 times negative 0.3. And we can break out the thing that we did up here, or we could do 3 times 3 is 9. There's 2 numbers behind the decimal, so we have to have 2 numbers behind the decimal. And then because they're both negative, our answer has to be positive. Remember, for this quiz, we do not get to use a calculator. So the next one, be very careful. Again, the negative is outside of the parentheses, so the only thing being squared is the 3/4. So that means we have 2 3/4. So we multiply all this together, our answer is going to be negative 9/16. See if you can simplify, and in this case we can't, so we're done. So on to dividing numbers. Dividing is basically multiplication. The quotient of 2 positive numbers or 2 negative numbers is always positive, so again, same sign, get positive, different sign, you get negative. So this first one, I have 1 negative, so my answer's got to be negative. And then you're asking yourself, how many times can 7 fit into 42? Or you could ask, 7 times what number will give me 42? And in this case, the answer is 6. So now the next one, we have 2 negatives, so we know our answer has to be positive. So how many times can 2 fit into 8? Exactly 4 times. This next one, only 1 negative, so our answer has to be negative. 8 fits into 8 1 time. Again, 2 negatives, they make positive. 3 fits into 39 13 times. And remember, if you don't know that off the top of your head, you could do some math on the side here and say, okay, 3 goes into 3 once with none left over. So 3 goes into 9 3 times with none left over. Now the inverse property of multiplication says that for every non-zero number, there's a multiplicative inverse, such that when you multiply a number and its multiplicative inverse, you end up with 1. So 5 and its multiplicative inverse, 1/5, multiply together to give you 1. It's always your reciprocal, so 5 can be written as 5 over 1. Even if you had something like 2/3, the multiplicative inverse would be 3/2. That technically gives us 6 on the top and 6 on the bottom, which we know simplifies to 1. We use this when we divide fractions. So for example, evaluate x divided by y, for x is negative 3/4 and y is negative 5/2. So we can rewrite this, negative 3/4 divided by negative 5/2. So right off the bat, I look at my 2 numbers, and because they're both negative, I know my answer has to be positive. And then in order to multiply these, or divide them, we can't just divide 3 divided by 5 and 4 divided by 2. What we have to do is keep the first number the same, change the sign to multiplication, and flip the second one over, find the reciprocal. Dividing by a number is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So think about real numbers, like 10 divided by 2 is the same thing as multiplying 10 by 1/2. You get 5 either way. So now this turns into straight multiplication. We know our answer is going to be positive, and if we multiply these together, we get 6/20. And then again, always see if you can simplify. So 2 goes into both of these, we get 3/10. So you should be able to multiply and divide rational numbers with these 3 examples. You need to plug in negative 2 for x, 3 for y, and 3.5 for z, and then do your multiplication and division. Remember also to follow PEMDAS. Make sure you write down any questions you have, and we can go over them in class tomorrow.